Welcome to An Honorable Profession, a podcast giving America hope since 2018. I'm Ryan Coonerty. Along with Debbie Cox Bolton of the New Deal, I'm lucky enough to be your co-host. An Honorable Profession is a New Deal Leaders podcast. The New Deal is an organization that supports the next generation of American leaders. From attorneys generals to state senators to mayors to school board members, these are the people that are pushing policies and politics that will respond to climate change, rebuild our economy, address racial injustice, and restore our democracy. These are incredibly talented people who have dedicated themselves to public service when their country and their communities needed it the most. Check out newdealleaders.org to see what I'm talking about. Let me tell you about Harris County Commissioner Lesley Briones. She grew up on the border, the daughter of teachers. She went to Harvard and Yale Law School. She taught public school, served as a judge, and now is a commissioner in one of the largest, most politically consequential counties in the United States. She represents more people than a member of Congress and 8 governors. We talked about managing the chaos and pain inflicted by the Trump administration and what it will take to turn Texas blue. Hint, not much. Finally, Briones gets personal. She shared how her faith drives her and how the Democratic Party needs to embrace religion as a force for love, goodness, and humanity. Enjoy. Harris County Commissioner Lesley Briones, welcome to An Honorable Profession.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity.
I don't think we can capture in that small title just how big your job is. You represent more people than a member of Congress does, than many governors do. It's a large, complex county. Can you just tell us a little bit about Harris County and then also what a county commissioner does?
Absolutely. So Harris County, most people would know it by Houston, but Harris County population-wise is bigger than 26 U.S. states. It's the 3rd largest county in the country, and we're right there with Cook County, so it's LA, Cook, and Harris. And we have 34 cities. City of Houston is the one most folks are familiar with. And I love county government, and as commissioner, there are 5 people who run commissioner's court in Texas. There's 4 commissioners and 1 county judge, regardless of how tiny the county is in Texas or how large. And so it's 2 hats, really. One hat is I'm one of 5 votes for all countywide decisions, setting a tax rate, how much we're going to invest in public safety, in our courts, in infrastructure projects, flood mitigation, administering elections, public health. And then the other hat is I am in charge of a 4th of the county. So my precinct is it's larger than 8 U.S. states, and we have about 1.25 million people. We have a team of about 500 hardworking men and women, and we have thousands of miles of road that we're in charge of, whether it's filling a pothole, cleaning a ditch. We're first responders. We unfortunately have a problem with hurricanes around here, as well as tornadoes, derechos, and flooding. And so we're the first responders, whether it's going to rescue people in a high water rescue vehicle, picking up debris. We have 62 parks in our portfolio and 10 community centers, 2 nature centers. So we have free programming for people of all ages, and we are the partner, and we partner with all the 34 cities as well, because local government, especially in these times under the Trump administration, and Harris County is a very blue island in a deeply red state. And so local government, now more than ever, is where we are showing that we can work, and we can work for all people across the aisles to get things done.
And can you talk a little bit about, give us some examples of that work over the past month, especially navigating federal shutdowns, big cuts to essential programs, the dynamics, the internal dynamics of Texas politics. Like, tell us all the challenges and opportunities you're looking at right now.
Sure. So I'll start with the federal government first. And I say all of this with deep love. I'm a proud American. I love this country. I love what our country stands for. And I'm, as a lawyer and as a former judge, this approach that it is not based in respect for the rule of law, for our constitutional rights, and for the fact that we can be proud that we're a nation of immigrants and we're a nation where the American dream should be alive and well, and it should not be just relegated to a few. So Harris County relies on billions of dollars of federal grants. So it's very disappointing that we're in the longest shutdown our country's seen, because my philosophy is you show up, you do your job, you get to work, and you find a solution. So it's deeply disappointing. In terms of how it's tangibly impacting Harris County, I'll give you some examples of how the Trump administration has been affecting Harris County. First, I'll focus on disasters. So as I mentioned, even just last year, we had a tornado, a derecho, a hurricane. We've had 12 federally declared disasters in just the last few years in recent history. So with the cuts to FEMA, to NOAA, and to the National Weather Service, it's deeply concerning not knowing if the federal government, or to what extent the federal government, will show up for our next hurricane or other disaster. So that is something that we've been just doubling down and being as prepared as possible through public-private partnerships, making sure we have, more staging sites, more supplies that we can activate, again, not knowing. But ultimately, we, as federal taxpayers, you expect the federal government to show up when there's a disaster. So that's one area. Another area that has been deeply disappointing, to put it lightly, is Harris County and a few other Texas jurisdictions. We received a $250 million Solar for All grant, which I'm very proud that we're the energy capital of the world here in Houston, Texas, and we need to be leaning into the energy transition and making sure we are diversifying our portfolio when we can't keep the lights on in the energy capital of the world because we have a very flawed grid in Texas, which is a longer issue. But the bottom line is they cut the $250 million grant, which was going to provide solar energy for underserved neighborhoods and help the most vulnerable residents and create union jobs. And it was going to help diversify our energy portfolio. So that was another way it's impacted. Just Friday, we learned that our funding, so Harris County Public Health, now it's the only one in Texas that provides health care to refugees and those seeking asylum. These are people, as we know, who are in this country, lawfully allowed to be in this country, that have been granted permission. And one of the standard protocol, and this has been open for over 40 years throughout all different types of administrations, is they have a health screening, immunizations, testing, etc. The funding has been cut entirely. We have thousands of people in the queue waiting healthcare. And it's not only a threat for those individuals, but it's also a threat for everyone in the community, because when we have these individuals fleeing political and religious persecution who have been lawfully given the authority to be in this country, and they come with, we don't know what they may or may not be carrying. And so it puts everybody at risk. So again, that's another example of how the Trump administration has been negatively affecting our community. I could go on. The SNAP, unfortunately, with the cuts to SNAP and just the complete freeze, Harris County already, we already have 3 times the national average in terms of food insecurity. So when you're looking at Harris County residents, approximately 1 million are being affected, and we already have a problem on any given day, which has been tremendously exacerbated. And as a mom of 3 and as a former teacher, it deeply bothers me that disproportionately this is affecting our children, and the fact that they're playing politics in a way that is denying people food on their table is unconscionable. So I could go on. So that's some of the federal challenges we're experiencing. In terms of this state, well, first I'll lead with, our governor has become an instrumentality of Trump. So Trump has asked Texas to redistrict. And as you know, they redistricted. So 5 seats, congressional seats that are now Republican seats. We'll see how this all plays out in the courts. So we have lost. And of course, it was interesting to see last week in California with Prop 50 passing with the number as it did, and trying to nullify what was passed in Texas, so that now they'll have 5 D seats. But again, this is, to me, not the best of what America represents. It shouldn't be this nuclear arms race or race to the bottom, whichever analogy you want to use. So that's one example of how Abbott has become the instrumentality of Trump. So another way is there's been various pieces of legislation that have been specifically bracketed just to Harris County. And this is whether it's taking away our elections administrator, for example, and creating additional layers of the ability for the state to come in and take over control of the administration of elections. It's still with the county clerk and the tax assessor collector, but there's different protocols applicable to Harris County, for example, than other large counties. Another example is, and luckily this has been rectified, and I pray it stays the same, but after Hurricane Harvey, we had been waiting for years from the funding that HUD had sent, and the state of Texas was holding it and literally allocated $0 to Harris County under George P. Bush when he was our general land commissioner. Zero. Now we have a general land commissioner who's much more fair and wants to serve all people and work across political lines. And so we have long last received the funding that we had been waiting for since 2017 after Harvey. So the state, again, as a proud Texan, I want to work with anyone who wants to work for the people of Texas. And so I've taken it upon myself to just keep going to Austin. And for example, there were bills filed to try to take over the Harris County Flood Control District, try to take the toll road, all these sorts of kind of death blow to local government type of bills, but only for Harris County. And I'm like, there's R's and D's in Harris County. Like, what are we trying to achieve by this zero-sum game? And so it's been interesting to try to hit reset to the extent possible, try to work collaboratively with folks, even when we don't see eye to eye on many things. But I'm like, at the very least, in terms of the safety of our residents, infrastructure, job creation, we should be able to work together. But it's really difficult when, for example, the state of Texas came in and took over Houston Independent School District. My 3 little girl, I believe deeply in public education. My 3 little girls go to HISD, and it's been taken over by the state. So anyway, those are just a few of examples, but how we have chosen to just move forward. 1, we just have to be persistent. 2, I deeply believe in that there's more that actually unites us when we actually sit down to listen and talk and treat each other with respect and civility. And so we've just been trying to show up and forge additional public-private partnerships to fill in these gaps, whether it's food distributions, to try to fill some of the gap that is tremendous given what has been happening to SNAP. We've just been trying to step up, working with schools, places of worship, business community, multiple levels of local government to just come together and try to solve problems as a community.
It strikes me that just so many of these policies are just mean-spirited and, so highly partisan, with just that's the ending goal is just a partisan goal versus a service goal or a philosophical difference. And I guess, like, how do you stay hopeful? How do you stay engaged when it feels like you're running around just putting out fires that people are intentionally setting?
Well, to be honest, the main reason I stay hopeful is every day, when I go home to my 3 little girls, my fabulous husband, I'm like, we have to have hope because of what we're leaving for our kids and our grandkids. Like, we must be the change we want to see and that they deserve. So we can't throw up our hands. And I also have hope in terms of last Tuesday, for instance, gave me hope in what we saw in Virginia and New Jersey. It's given me hope seeing how what we've been able to do in Georgia and Arizona. I do think that when we can show how Democrats can deliver public safety, deliver infrastructure, deliver jobs, deliver affordability, deliver access to quality healthcare and education. So what gives me hope is that let us show what we can do and meanwhile build the political infrastructure, because when we make Texas a swing state, it's all in play and there's a path forward. So, and the truth is, putting aside my bias and my deep love for Harris County, the way we flip Texas is right here in Harris County if you look at the data and you look at the numbers. So more specifically, in 2024, Harris County had a turnout of 58.8%. If we can get turnout to 65%, which I'm confident we can do, and if we can plus up Democratic performance by 3%, Texas is in a dead tie.
Wow.
And so literally 58.8 to 65, plussing up 3% for Dems, Texas is in a dead tie. And so it's up to us, on the political side to really continue the registration, the active 365 engagement, not just showing up when we want someone to vote, and then making sure we're talking about what people actually care about. And as a Texas Democrat, we really need to be, well, all Democrats across the country, but especially here, it's like we need to be talking about jobs, jobs, jobs. How do we make life more affordable for families? How do we help make opportunity more available for families? And I grew up on the US-Mexico border, and literally one of the gateways of the American dream. And my family came to this country because they believed in the promise of America. And so how do we make that real and tangible and within people's reach, and get out of the ivory tower? And, it's like we need to be talking to all people and make our party, which we always pride ourselves on being a big tent party, but truly in the most inclusive, respectful, giving people a place right across the spectrum of ideology, and then welcoming those independents and ours who feel like they don't have a place with this kind of more extreme version of governance from the Republican Party. And so what gives me hope is that change is within. A, we need to focus on what's within our own power to change and deliver. But B, there is a pathway. And the only way we're going to get there is if we're relentless. And part of being relentless is the hope that your consistent work and action will result in your dream and what you're, so passionate about obtaining, which in my case is I can't wait for us to flip Texas.
I love that vision. And I love how close it is. That's I had no idea. Can you talk a little bit about, when these cuts are made or the federal government stops functioning and flights are canceled and there's cuts to food programs, disaster relief, solar programs, all the things that you're talking about, that does affect everybody, not just Democrats. What are you hearing on the ground about how people feel about how the Republicans at the federal level and at the state level are doing in serving their constituents?
So one thing that I hear is like, they need to do their job. They need to go to work. Like, I have to go to work. I have to do what I need to do. Like, why can't they just figure it out and get it done? So it's just this like frustration in terms of do your job. The other is this has gone far too extreme. So, and the combination of those two factors, which I believe, and we're here in the New Deal Leaders Forum, I believe that will serve, as we saw last week, it will help us in 2026. But that's what I'm hearing. It's like, we need you to show up, do what you said you're going to do, and do it in a way that is more fair. Now, for example, I'm a proud Latina, and it was interesting just to see how successful Trump was with Latinos and the Latino vote. And so one thing recent polling has shown us here in Harris County is that his immigration policy, for instance, has gotten too extreme for many people, but especially in the Latino. So I'm hoping we can stop the slippage and return folks back to where, that was more aligned with their ultimate interests. So, but again, rather than just pointing fingers at Trump, I think it's up to us to hold up a mirror and say, what have we done? How can we deliver? And how can we build that credibility that we're appealing to more people? And so
I love it. You mentioned a couple times your background, and it's an extraordinary story. Growing up in a border town, child of teachers, go to Ivy League schools, come back and teach, go to Yale Law School, come back and serve your community. Can you talk a little bit about that journey and how you think it informs your policymaking?
Well, thank you for your kind words. So being raised by teachers, education was everything. Education's the great equalizer. And my parents, they just both retired after about 50 years each of educating. Laredoans is you should use your talents God gave you to serve others and make the community better. So that was everything growing up. And my parents were my best friends and my role models. And then growing up on the border, it literally was this one of the gateways to the American dream, and just that work ethic that if you're willing to put in the work and dream and fight for what you're trying to achieve. In America, it's possible, right? There is that mobility. And so that I feel like is in my DNA. And so when I see people think the American dream is just this dead myth or, is unattainable now, I'm like, this is the fabric of our country and it must be attainable for more people. And it worked for many of us and it needs to work for more people. And so that's been key. And I'm so grateful that because of scholarships and working multiple part-time jobs and loans that I'm still paying off, I was able to go study at Harvard and then Yale Law School. And being a teacher was one of the highlights of my life. But also seeing, unfortunately, how so many systems were failing my students, right? The immigration system, many of them were juvenile justice involved youth, the juvenile justice system, the education system, the child welfare system. And at the end of the day, it's like you have to change from the systemic level and we have to have fair laws. And then those laws have to be fairly and equitably applied. And so I loved my time as a teacher and then as a lawyer and as a judge, but now as commissioner, I love it the most. I've loved all the chapters that I'm so grateful to have had thus far in my life, but this is where I get to be in the community all day, every day, and try to show that the government can work, which is why my family moved to this country and why I believe so many others came to this country. And I think that, and tomorrow, for instance, one of my favorite things I get to do is go speak at naturalization ceremonies. And that's where this promise and hope in our country is just so palpable, and how these families or people have gone through some far too long process, but have gone through a process because they want it to be an American citizen, right? And so it's up to us, all of us collectively as Americans, to think of, to me, what's in the best interest of our country, not playing the zero-sum race to the bottom, which is just, we're all going to pay the price, frankly. So anyway, that's what growing up on the border, parents as teachers, and then at the end of the day, a mom, because I want my kids to have access to opportunity. I want all kids to have access to opportunity. And I want to feel safe letting my kids walk to the park alone, which I used to do as a kid. And to be honest, I don't feel comfortable. And so for all the kids here in Harris County and beyond, it's like we all need to be taking, and I'm a person of faith too, so it always goes back to my faith, but we all have a moral obligation to make our community, our county, our state, our country better. So I'm really grateful. I never thought I'd run for office ever. Truly, I often don't like politics and all the BS and gamesmanship and all that, but I do believe so deeply in our country and in our democracy and in what government can do if you really try to make it work.
Can you talk about that decision to run for office? Because I mean, with the talent and credentials you have, it is a relatively straightforward way to make a lot of money, live very comfortably. And now, given all the fights you're talking about, you're living profoundly uncomfortably in public service. And so what made you decide that the best impact you could have was in county, local elected office?
Well, the truth, Ryan, is that let me tell you the story. So there was a vacancy on a civil court bench, and I'm a lawyer, and I was general counsel of this national organization, and this lawyer in town called out of the blue and said, "Hey, Lesley, I think you'd be a great judge, but there's a vacancy, and Commissioner's Court has to fill this vacancy. You're kind of late to the game, but send your resume in by this afternoon, and I just think you'd be a great judge." And I had been praying for a sign because there had been some changes at the foundation I had been working at. And my husband's like, "Honey, you've been praying for a sign, like getting this call out of the blue. You should send in your resume." So this was a Wednesday. So several rounds of interviews later, the next Tuesday, I'm appointed to be a judge. And it's one thing interviewing for a job. And then the next thing, it seemed like a very distant reality. Like, oh, if I like it, I'll run to stay as a judge. Because in Texas, judges are elected. It seemed very distant. However, within weeks, I had to essentially, it's a longer story, but I had to announce that I was running to stay on the bench. And that's how I got brought into this world, even though I really had never planned on it. And my husband teases me because when we first started dating, he asked me, "Would you ever run for office?" I'm like, "Never, I would never do that." So he reminds me of that often. He's like, I didn't sign up
bet.
for this. I didn't sign up for this. I'm like, I know, I'm sorry. And thank you at the same time. So anyway, I was appointed in 2019, had to run in 2020, won, but I only was running for the unexpired term. So I was up in 2022. But then, well, every 10 years, there's redistricting based on the census, or there should be anyway, although that's now somewhat out the window. But anyway, they had redistricted this precinct and it was in play. And I was asked to run, and I looked and studied what we could really get done and how I could be an advocate again and really just work on all these issues I care so deeply about. And I decided to do it. But I had to resign from that bench to run. So it was very high risk, high reward, and ran against a long time incumbent with millions in the bank. And we were able to flip it. And then multiple Democrats got in the race. So there was 3 elections in 2022. And we, by the grace of God and the people of Precinct 4, I won. And so it really was an unexpected blessing. And I'm so grateful for my husband in particular, because not only was this not part of the plan, but then to resign from a bench, to be unemployed, to run against numerous Democrats and this well-liked income. And my husband's just like, what? But anyway, it worked out. And now I have a team in Precinct 4 of about 500 people who every day I'm energized by them, because we've hired public servants who want to get things done and do it in a way that county government has not has not delivered at this level. So we have a long road ahead. And we always talk about heart, hustle, and higher standards here on my team. And so I just feel so grateful, because the truth is, this was, as type A and goal oriented as I am, this was never part of the plan. And so I just am grateful that I married someone who's a true partner, because as you know, from being in elected office, it's not for the faint of heart, and and you have to have really thick skin.
Can you talk about a little bit about the different kind of service between being a judge and being a county commissioner? And I mean, obviously they're both elected, they're both doing service, but what's the difference between the two roles?
So this world, well, taking a step back, being a judge was wonderful, and I was so grateful, but it's very reactive. And I was a civil court judge, so I had it much easier than my criminal judge friends. But it's all gone to hell in a lawsuit, and you can be fair and listen and prepared, and but at the end of the day, I wasn't able to really help the people, because it was a judgment they were getting. And okay, great, but the systemic issue or the fraud or the real estate, it's very much this neutral, and I'm much more of an advocate. And so in retrospect, that those races as a judge seem like a walk in the park, because it was, people can get below the belt, but you're still running for a judicial office. And this is because Harris County is so huge, and because county commissioners in Texas, especially in Harris County, are some of the most powerful roles, especially Harris County, given the budget. People will, it's very cutthroat, and throw the mud and you're in it completely. So it's very different in that sense. But the beauty of it, and why I love it, is because we're always in the community, listening, hearing complaints and ideas from the constituents, and then going back to say what we've been able to do or not do, and why, by when. And so that interactive nature of it, and trying to show that the government can work, and then going back in the most kind of open way, transparent way, but also being very inclusive. So when I took office, for example, our website was in 1 language. Houston is the most diverse city in the country, and Harris County is one of the most diverse. So now it's in 12, right? We had boards and commissions where there had never been a woman who had been appointed, or never anyone from the AAPI community, or all these things. And so it's been wonderful to just change the approach entirely. And I have wonderful colleagues. So they had done it in their respective precincts, but in this precinct, it had been run in a very old school, non-inclusive manner. And so it's been great. So it's very different, because we're in charge of everything from public safety to infrastructure to administering elections to public health to working with the state and the federal government. So I'm constantly in advocacy, mode, and I try to be both a convener and bridge builder, but you're also having to fight all the time. And so it's that both and of I prefer unity always. And if unity is not going to work, then what do we have to do to make sure we're advocating and delivering for our people? And so it's this, I love it. It's way more me. As much as I loved being a judge, you have to be this neutral arbiter all the time. And you can't say anything that you think and so this is much more me, as I'm sure you can tell, knowing me for 20 years.
I can tell it's you for sure. I want to ask, because you've talked a couple times about your faith, and it's included in your bio on your website, and the Democratic Party has not recently been strong in talking about how faith and values can align with policy. And I just wonder if you have any advice or insights to the party on how to be more open about that relationship and the role that faith can play in driving change.
My short answer is we need to embrace it, and we need to talk about it, and we need to talk about our own faith and be inclusive of all faiths. So actually a reporter a few months ago said, you talk about your faith, like, are you sure you're not a Republican? And I took a step. I was like, Republicans don't have any claim over faith and family or democracy or the flag. I'm like, faith is for everybody if they so choose. I'm like, families for everybody if they so choose. And so to me, my faith and family are everything to me. And that's how I was raised, as a Latina, as a Catholic, as, my grandmas, my tias. And so to me, I lean in all the time because it's who I am. And so to the extent it is who someone is, I'm like, we shouldn't shy away. And I think it'll help us appeal to more folks who feel like they can't talk about their faith one way or another. And I mean, I could go on this topic, but at least I'm Christian, and I'm like, the Jesus I believe in was one of love, and was one of fairness, and was one of inclusion, and not judging, but to be tolerant and to love one another. And so that is, and again, it's like you can't just claim Christianity and then do all these hateful things. I'm like, I don't see Jesus being hateful at all, not one time. And so I think it's up to us as Democrats, to the extent it's authentic to one, to lean into it, because I want to lead with love, and I want to lead in a way that respects people, which is the Jesus I believe in. And so, but I do find it anytime you start talking about faith, and some Democratic clubs are like, what are you, do you go to the wrong meeting? I'm like, no, we need to include everybody. And, I'll give you an example. I was so thankful to my team. We held the first iftar during Ramadan that Harris County had held. And now we'll be in our fourth iftar. But it's making sure from all our faith in this intra-faith way that we're able to unite and uplift each other. And so to me, we all win when we can. Again, I approach things with unity and love first. And I think Democrats would be better off. And a fellow Texan, Talarico, Representative James Talarico, obviously he's a preacher. And he's another Democrat that I've seen recently quite a bit, always talking about their faith. And so I think our party actually is far more aligned with Christian values of love, tolerance, and respect than the other party. So I think we need to reclaim. And
I'm pretty sure Jesus wouldn't cut SNAP benefits for families.
Exactly.
I think it's basic. I want to say how much I appreciate that about you. And I think those values, when you read about your many accomplishments in Harris County, it's clear that you are approaching with values and with a commitment to your community. And it's wonderful to have you in the New Deal, and it's wonderful to have you on the podcast today. Thank you for joining us.
No, thank you for inviting me. And I'm so grateful to be in the New Deal Fellows, and look forward to continuing to learn from everyone on the team, and to continuing to build the Texas, but also the United States that all of our families deserve. So thank you so much. And I can't wait to see you in person soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
An Honorable Profession is a New Deal Leaders podcast. Thanks to the team at New Deal for producing this episode. We encourage you to bring honor to public service, and because we keep things honorable, no tax dollars are used in the making of this podcast.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group,